Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on what I know is a busy night, a busy week, but there seems to be good energy in the room, and so I hope that means that you're all excited to start the college process. Is that right? Okay. I'm Noreen Cassidy. I'm Director of College Counseling. I'm one of 4 in the College Counseling Office, and you'll be hearing from each of my colleagues as we make our way through the program. As you hear from them, they'll each give you a little bit about their background. But as for me, I've been at Morristown Baird for just over 20 years. Prior to that, I enjoyed a long career in college admission, primarily at NYU and at Fordham University. And I also served as the director of admission at a boarding school for students with learning differences just prior to coming to MBS. When I think about the work that we do and what I like about it, I often reference the cyclical nature of this process. We're at a point right now where we're just finishing up our busiest time with the seniors, with most of their applications being submitted. And so while they're quiet for a little bit, we have the pleasure of circling back and beginning the cycle with a new group of students. So we're very excited to begin our work with the class of 2025, and we hope that you are as well. In terms of what we'll be covering tonight, the college admission landscape is ever-changing, particularly in recent years. As such, we'll be discussing some of the current trends, factors to consider as you begin your college search, factors that colleges consider as they're reviewing applications, and finally, how our office will work to support each individual family. We have also recruited some other members of the MBS community, parents and alumni who recently went through the college process, and so you'll be hearing their reflections throughout the evening in the form of some video interludes, and some of you will actually see some familiar faces. And then we'll wrap up with some questions, and we'll look to have you on your way by about 7:30 or so. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Marmo to play our first video.
My name is Lisa Massino. My son Max graduated last year. He is currently a freshman at the University of Richmond. I remember very clearly junior parent college night, feeling overwhelmed, my heart racing, thinking, how are we going to do this? But I must admit now that I would give anything to go back to junior night and have 2 more years home with him. But we can't do that. We have to apply to college. So a few things about how we got through the process. First, I think balance in the high school experience. Noreen gave us advice early on to really be true to Max, provide a balanced, positive experience. And by this I mean there's a lot of noise about the APs, what you should do to go on your transcript, all of that. I think in the end, we wanted to make sure that Max was happy. It's important to show increased rigor, but there has to be interest in the course. And that's not the only thing we believe makes up a person. So we tried to maintain balance throughout all of that part of the process. Secondly, we were realistic. The college landscape is unusual. Safeties, targets, you have preconceived notions, you kind of have to throw them out the door. Be very open to the list, a broad range. Max was very open. Once he started to articulate some feelings, of course we would eliminate some things, but size, location, things like that. We gave everything a shot. We were very open-minded and realistic. Lastly, an invaluable piece of advice is engagement. I think this affected our outcome greatly. Engagement with the school, visiting the school, trying to speak to someone while you're there. When the rep comes to MBS, making a point to speak to them, following up gingerly, of course, perhaps a summer program. Again, savor the next 2 years, and good luck.
So just to start off with some of our own trends here at MBS, as you can see, our students do a great job of considering all of the options that are available to them. So in last year's class of 105 students, they are attending 69 different colleges spread out over half of the country. The majority attend private institutions, although the public percentage has grown with more of our students being drawn to some of the big flagship state schools. On average, they submit 8 applications, and the class had an overall admit rate of 58%. This is pretty typical, although it can fluctuate from year to year, anywhere from the high 50s to about 65%. In short, though, we really do believe that if students conduct a thoughtful search and they apply to a balanced list of schools, as you just heard in the video, they're usually accepted to more than half. Last year, 46% leveraged the benefit of binding early decision application plans, and many of our students take advantage of test optional policies. In terms of broader trends, it's really those last 2 bullet points that I'd like to touch on as things to consider as you approach the college search. According to the Common Application, applications were up 7.5% last year, but up 20% over the 2019-2020 cycle, just prior to the pandemic. Despite these large application pools, schools are still continuing to rely on binding early decision application plans to secure large percentages of their class. In many cases, as much as 50% of entering freshmen have been admitted through ED. You'll hear a little bit more about this later, but for those of you who aren't familiar, students who apply ED are making a commitment that if they're accepted to that school, they will enroll and withdraw all of their remaining applications. So hence the binding nature of it. Not all colleges offer early decision. However, for those that do, it's not unusual to see a significant disparity between ED and regular decision admit rates. Here you can clearly see that this disparity, at a sampling of schools, all of which currently enroll MBS students who were admitted through either early decision or regular decision. You'll also notice that in some cases that difference is fairly drastic, as in the case of Tulane. Some are more moderate, as in BC and BU, and while Lehigh reflects a 30% difference, their regular decision admit rate of 36% is still very reasonable. We point this out not to encourage you to approach this process in search of your ED school, but rather as something to keep in mind as you visit campuses and begin to identify those characteristics that resonate with you. Test optional admission, and as you see listed on the screen, test blind or score-free admission is another significant trend to keep in mind. Test optional meaning that students have the option of submitting scores, and test blind or score-free, meaning that scores will not be considered even if provided. If you think back to what was the 2021 admission cycle, we were in the height of the pandemic. Students were not able to complete campus visits, nor were many of them able to sit for the SAT or ACT. Both of these factors contributed to students applying to more colleges, particularly the latter, with many willing to throw their hat in the ring without the requirement of a test score. While test optional has been around for a long time, I think, that starting date is 1987. You can see that just prior to the pandemic, about 45% of schools offered test optional policies. That grew to over 70% in 2021. With a few exceptions, schools have continued the test optional policies that took effect during COVID, and then even more adopting these policies more recently, such that we're close to about 80% of schools now having test optional policies in existence. Again, according to the Common Application, in the 2019-2020 cycle, 78% of applicants submitted test scores, and only 47% did last year. So what does that mean for the class of 2025? First of all, your academic profile may be such that there are college options available to you without the requirement of a test score that wouldn't have been before. It's also fairly likely that none of the schools to which you plan to apply will require test scores. In fact, more and more we are having conversations with students for whom standardized testing has never been a strength to simply take it out of the process, as it can be both time-consuming and expensive to prepare for the SAT or ACT. Finally, one of the outcomes of the test optional movement is that average scores for accepted students at many institutions has increased based on the students who are opting to submit. In other words, what used to be a, quote, good score has changed. So even if you are a strong test taker and decide to sit for either the SAT or ACT, it's possible that depending on the college, you may be advised not to submit. So again, these are a couple of the factors that are serving to define the current college admission landscape. Before I turn it over to Ms. Laskey, we'll hear from another one of our former parents.
Hi, my name is Jerry Hong. We've had 4 boys at MBS, 3 of whom who are in college today. What really helped us through this college process is kind of trying to break it down in pieces. You know, I think the beginning process was really helpful for us was to really find the criteria of what kind of school each child was looking for. Did they want a rural, a suburban, an urban environment? Did they need a large school, medium-sized, small school? Was geography important? And once we got through a lot of those criterias, it really narrowed down our list and also allowed us to start focusing on what areas of interest each child wanted to study. And hopefully what you'll discover, like we have as well, is there's a tremendous amount of fantastic schools that your child would actually be very, very happy with. And the one thing that I think is just going to be a little difficult in general is there is just a bit of randomness in how colleges select kids these days. And I know it makes you as a parent feel a little bit helpless, and obviously the child as well. So I think in part of this, you just want to be really supportive and let them understand that there isn't one school that they have to get to, that there's a lot of very, very good options, and it will help reduce the stress for all parties. So good luck in this process.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Laskey. I am one of the 4 college counselors here. I'm currently in my 7th year at MBS. I started my career in higher education, actually working at a high school in rural Virginia through an AmeriCorps program, and then I worked in a number of years in college admissions at Kenyon College in Ohio. One thing I really liked about working at a small college was that I was able to build relationships with students really throughout the entire college process. But I knew that if I came back to a high school, I'd be able to work with families like yourselves even more closely and help students develop really thoughtful lists. So one of the common themes you're going to hear tonight, you actually just heard it from the last parent who spoke, and you'll hear it from my colleagues as well, is just the importance of reducing stress and anxiety. At this point, after 7 years, I've realized that it's pretty much impossible to avoid it completely in this process, unfortunately. But we do want to do everything we can to minimize how much of it you and your students have to experience. So I'm curious, I just want to do a quick show of hands for how many families in the room this is your first student going through the process, so the oldest sibling or, okay, all right, great, welcome, wonderful. And then for how many of you have you been through this process before, maybe with an older sibling? Okay, all right, interesting, it's an interesting split, okay. So I was curious because, even if you're starting the process fresh, everything is new, right? There's so much information to take in, and hopefully, we'll address some of that anxiety tonight. But even if for those parents who have been through it before, like the last parent who just spoke, so much can change from year to year in the college admission landscape, or if your student is looking at a different set of schools than maybe the older sibling did, it really can feel like starting over. What adds to that stress might be the fact that there's a good amount of misinformation or contradictory information that you're going to find out there online or just in talking to people, and making sense of all of it can feel like a full-time job. So please, we're all very accessible. Do not hesitate to call or email, your college counselor if ever you find anything that's confusing or just doesn't sit right with you. If for some reason we don't know the answer, we won't hesitate to, pick up the phone and call our colleagues in admissions to get that answer and get back to you. Know that we're here to provide support and guidance for all members of the family through this process, but I did want to emphasize before getting into the rest of my portion that students are really going to be the ones leading this process. So we hope they'll do that over the course of the next year or year and a half. All right. So I wanted to start off with a quick visual. Perfect. I wanted to make sure it was cooperating. So 3,401, that is the number of colleges and universities in the U.S. So that sharing that number with you could have one of two effects. It may overwhelm you with just the sheer number of colleges that are out there. How am I going to narrow that down? Or it could, hopefully, what I'm hope will happen is that it will reassure you that there is a home, or often many potential homes, for every single student in this room. And if you're curious, the blue dots on here are public schools, green are private. So I wanted to sort of point that out. And then if you wanted to break it down even further, you can see I had a lot of fun with maps. So we found that there's just over 2,000 four-year colleges. Many of our students will focus on those during their college search. And then if you want to sort it by small, medium, and large, pretty much unless you're looking for a large public university in the Great Plains, you're going to find a lot of college options, no matter where you want to look. And I also wanted to point out, especially in that upper left map, there are so many schools that are right nearby us, and I'll get more into this later, but there are so many schools you can visit just to get a sense of what's out there without having to travel to all parts of the country. One of the misconceptions I hear a lot in my office is, everyone from MBS goes to the same 10 or 15 schools. But as you heard from Ms. Cassidy earlier, that's just not the case. But in order for us to really have a thoughtful college search and for everyone to end up at the right home for them, we do need buy-in both from students and from their parents and guardians, which I think was something Lisa spoke to earlier. Really try to be open-minded through this process. If either one of your college counselors or a trusted adult shares a college with you and you haven't heard of that before, that's your first thought, that's okay. That's an opportunity to research and find out why they suggested it. It shouldn't be a conversation ender. All right, so now that you know just the overwhelming number of colleges that are in the country, what are you going to do to get started with the process? So the first thing we're going to ask you to do is some personal assessment. One of those tools is going to be a questionnaire that my colleagues are going to talk about later. But we do want you to spend some time, again, ideally with the break coming up and winter break after that, really doing some reflection and thinking about those big picture questions. Like the parent who just spoke before me was mentioning, there's so many little factors you can use to really start narrowing it down. I always recommend starting with the academic environment because hopefully you're going to college to learn more and get a job, all of that important stuff. So think about the class sizes. If you're coming from MBS, it's a small place. Do you want to continue with that, or are you ready for somewhere that's a little larger that maybe has more lectures as opposed to discussions? Or do you want easy access to your professors? Is that important to you? And are there particular majors you want to make sure your college has? Or if you're completely undecided, is that college going to give you the resources you need to figure out what you want to study or do after college? Some of you may want to continue with a sport or a certain activity, dance, musical theater, and you want to make sure your college offers that opportunity. We can talk about that. And then distance from home, that's certainly important if you think about, am I ready to be somewhere completely different? Or do I want to be within driving distance? That's something to consider. And then financial considerations is my next bullet point. For those of you who joined us for the financial aid workshop a couple weeks ago, that was one of the points we really tried to hammer home was, make sure you're having those conversations now about what your financial circumstances are, just to make sure that you're not struggling to make that decision in the spring of your student's senior year. If we know ahead of time that need-based aid or scholarships are going to be important to you and your family, and we know that, that's something that we can definitely incorporate into the college search. And then finally, just what's the right environment for your student? Are you going to do really well in more of a city environment? Do you want somewhere more rural where the college is the focus of the town, or do you want maybe somewhere split the difference and end up in a college town? One factor that should not be taking precedent would be where your friends are applying, right? If you do that, even if you have a lot of similarities, what is the right fit for them may not be exactly what's going to be the right fit for you. So try to avoid that as much as possible, and I promise this process will go more smoothly. I did put in both all caps and bold, so you can see that I'm real serious about this. Your college counselor is definitely one of the resources that we hope you will use. There's a lot of people who will start chiming in. I mentioned Thanksgiving coming up. A lot of people will have an opinion about where you should be going to college or where you should be looking. But I would just encourage you to keep us in the loop, keep us updated. The more you do that, the smoother this process is going to go. There are many stages in the college application process where we advocate for your students, so it's helpful to actually know who you are to be able to express that to the colleges. A lot of your college research is going to happen by looking at the internet. It's just unavoidable now. There's some real benefits to that, but there's also going to be a wide variety in terms of how accurate that information is. So please always consider the source. I did mention 2 resources up here. CALFO, all of you have access to it, but definitely reach out to your college counselor if you're having trouble. We can get you signed in. It's just a great tool. You can put in some different search parameters, get a list of colleges that might be a good fit, and then perhaps more importantly, you can see some historical data about MBS students who have applied in recent years, just to give you a ballpark of what colleges might be the right choice for you. And then of course we'll put that in context with our individual conversations. And then I would say, just the college websites themselves are going to have the best, most up-to-date information about majors or, financial deadlines or anything like that. So make sure you're starting there. It's when you start getting into those third-party websites that things get a little, maybe sketchy. And as much as you can, avoid message boards, or I guess now it's more like TikTok videos, right? So you're going to see a lot of information out there with people who claim to be experts about how they got into a school, but you're never sure what information they're leaving out or, or adding to that story. So just always wanted to start with that disclaimer. So tours and information sessions, many of you will start your college visits probably over spring break and summer break. Those tend to be a popular time. If you're really eager to get started, especially with those breaks coming up, like I said earlier, there's so many colleges right near us. So if you're local or you're visiting family, just see if there's any colleges nearby, even if it's not on your radar at all, or you're thinking this is not going to be the right fit for my student. It's helpful just to get a sense of what they're going to say, just to, again, as more of a low stakes visit. It's interesting when you go on that first visit, you start hearing those things that they sound really great, and then by the second or third, you're like, I think I've heard this before. This sounds a little less impressive now. So by the time you're actually doing your visits in earnest in the spring and into the summer, you really know what to be listening out for. And I will say, just please, as we're finishing up with the seniors now, please take notes about what you liked and didn't like at the schools. It's so helpful when you're applying in the fall. It's amazing how quickly you forget that. So if you're visiting schools, just, if you can, try to take some notes. I just want to encourage you to see a variety of schools in terms of both size, setting, and then also selectivity. Each spring break, usually when families return, we'll hear about what we refer to as the heartbreak tour, where students have only seen schools with, a sub 10 or 20% admit rate. It's really important to see a variety so that when you come back again later in the year and into the fall, that you've seen a lot of options that are going to be realistic for you. So we do ask that you keep us in the loop, and we'd be happy to suggest some places to check out into the spring. There will also be interviews at some of the schools on your list, depending on where you're looking. Probably that's not going to happen until the spring, so we won't worry about it too much right now. But if you are traveling in the spring and it's offered, I would encourage you to sign up for it. And your college counselor is happy to be a resource for you, help prepare for it, or do some mock, maybe a mock interview. That's certainly something we're happy to do, but know that those will continue into the summer and fall. And then finally, I would say virtual visits are going to be your friend. It's no substitute for going in person, but just with how difficult it is to travel right now, it's really nice if you can get a feel of the school, again, especially one that maybe someone put on your radar you didn't know much about. That's a great way to get a sense of it, and then if you don't like anything they said, then you don't have to spend all the money and time to get out there. And then finally, when you all are seniors, so about 10 months from now, you'll be meeting with college representatives when they come to MBS. So we always hear from our college reps that MBS seniors ask really good questions, and I think that's because our students do really thoughtful research to try to find that out. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to a student who graduated last year to talk a little bit more about advice for the senior class, or junior class.
Hi, my name is Rachel Jack, and I'm a Morristown alumni currently attending Princeton University. And some tips that I would have in regards to the application process are to create a list that have a mix of reach, safety, and target schools. Of course, apply to universities that you can see yourself at. That could be in regards to your extracurriculars, your academic interest, or your academic goals. Don't be afraid, of course, to apply to schools with lower acceptance rates, because in making the decision to accept you, or not, admissions officers do take a holistic view of your application, and that means that they consider various components. Always keep an open mind. You will not know everything from simply researching the school online or even just visiting. So I would advise students to reach out to current students at the university, even alumni and some faculty, because you can get a more personalized perspective of the university and something that would be more direct. And one thing that I would have definitely done differently was to start a little earlier in terms of writing the essays and also the short prompts, because these can be very time consuming, and we all know that senior year can be a little bit hectic and heavy in the workload. So in order to keep a peace of mind and enjoy the process, I would definitely advise students to prioritize their time.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here this evening. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Lindsay Johnson, one of the college counselors. I have been at Morristown Baird for about 8 years. I also serve in the role, I was the dean of the class of 22, so I know I have some familiar faces of parents and guardians in the room, and then I'm also the dean for the class of 26, so our current sophomores. I started my career in college admission. None of us really go into this saying, oh, we want to work in college admission because it sounds like so much fun. You really don't know what that job is about. So I started working as an orientation counselor over the summer, and I realized that one of the most difficult things that we're asking students at the time when they're 17, 18 years old is, what do you want to do for the next 4 years of your life? And oh, by the way, you're going to live away from your families for the first time, and maybe across the country, driving a long distance, or whatever it is, or even just if it's 40 minutes down the road. But it's a big change. Oh, and if you haven't shared a room, guess what? You're going to share a really small space with someone. So there's a lot that you've got to figure out at this time. And so it's okay that you don't know what you want to do. So I got into college admission because it was a great career. And I was speaking with someone earlier, and the great thing about this profession is it's always changing. You heard from Ms. Cassidy earlier about how the landscape shifts and the different things, and that's what keeps us excited about what we do. And so we're able to bring that excitement to you. So I worked in college admission for almost 10 years at a number of different types of institutions, including my alma mater, which was NC State University. So I've worked at large public institutions as well as small private. And then I also transitioned to the college counseling side and was at a private school in Connecticut for a couple of years, and then moved to New Jersey and here at Morristown Baird. So a lot of this process, and you're going to hear some similar themes as we go out throughout the evening, and then also when you're visiting college campuses. But one of the biggest pieces that I want to kind of reiterate to you is throughout this process, we hope that you identify with your authentic self. So we're going to talk a lot about self-reflection, where Ms. Laskey talked about the personal assessment, where we want to know a little bit more about you. And so the more you're able to be honest with us and tell us a little bit about who you are, the better that's going to be, because we're going to work to find that right fit. We're going to work together to get to know you, to make sure that it is going to be a great opportunity just in a lot of different ways. Plus, it's fun to get to know you through this process. And there's a lot of self-discovery. Where we start on day one isn't always where we end up, and that's okay. And so I think that as long as we work together, we keep the lines of communication open, it's something that kind of comes together in a really nice and exciting way. So for me, to get started, Rachel talked a little bit about all those different aspects of the application. And one of the things she mentioned was wanting, she'd wish she had started a little bit earlier. And so, because there are so many different components that go into your application. So the great thing is we're kicking off this work with you this evening. The spring semester, we're really going to be focused on the different things that we can do together, that college search, and starting to think about the various components that make you the applicant who you are. And so when I was in college admission, when all of us that work there, what college admission officers are looking for are a number of different pieces. So one of those key terms that I mentioned is going to be that holistic review. So if any of you have done an information session yet, you've probably heard that. We conduct a holistic review. So essentially, they just want to get to know every aspect of who you are as a student and what are you going to be able to contribute to the college campus. So you are the center of that review as the applicant. So a lot of times students will come into my office, especially early on when I've had meetings with 9th and 10th grade students, and they always ask, well, what do I need to do? Is this a good thing to do to be accepted to college? And I want us to take kind of a different approach, and I want us to think about, it's not necessarily, is this a good thing? It's more, is this something that excites you and you can build on? So in the way that you're involved in various things, it doesn't mean you have to be a 3-sport athlete involved in every club and organization leader of every single thing in the school play, etc. You can be all of those things in one, or you could be somebody who's more specialized and you have one particular passionate area of passion that you're excited about. So that combination of things is what really the colleges are looking for, because they want to build a diverse community of learners. So they don't want everybody to come to campus and be exactly the same. So they don't want everybody to come and all be one particular major. So that's why when we're talking about major and your interests, we want to think about how those connect and what are things that you've done to demonstrate your various interests in those different ways. And this is all that's going to come out in our earlier conversations. So in looking at kind of the screen, you can see that there are the multiple factors that are taken into consideration. And it's not linear. And so when you're reviewing applications, it can go in a lot of different ways. So obviously you have your high school curriculum. Your transcript, that is the piece that helps the college and university understand a little bit more about who you were within the classroom. And we recognize each transcript kind of has a story. So depending on where you started, in terms of academically, the courses that you took, maybe there were certain courses that you took that were more of interest, so now you're exploring some academic electives that you like. It depends on how you've challenged yourself within that curriculum. So you'll see kind of off of the transcript is not just the grades that you've received in those classes, but we're also thinking about what you've done and in context of your school. So colleges and universities are really looking at you specific to the Morristown Baird School curriculum. So in your folders, and you don't have to look right this moment, but in your folders you do have a copy of the school profile for the class of 24. So the school profile goes with every application that's submitted to your institutions, and colleges and universities keep a database of all those, but that gives them a sense of what is it that we have to offer here. And when you look at it, it's actually pretty impressive and pretty exciting, and many of those college reps that come through and we meet with them and we talk to them and we share a little bit about the different pathways that our students might take, they're just as excited to see, because we kind of have some courses, those AS courses that are very suited to those intro level, college level courses. So it's nice to be able to kind of build that and help the college representatives understand why we're so excited about the different opportunities available to our students. Other offerings like the ICP program that some of you may have taken advantage of, that's something else that's going to be on your transcript and something else they're going to look at. So again, it's a factor and a combination of all those different things. So maybe you're more a STEM-focused student, and so you focused a lot of your coursework that way. Or you've done an independent study. There's something that you've worked closely with one of your teachers on. So these are all different aspects that are going to kind of get that academic profile within there. Maybe there's some four-year trends. Perhaps freshman year wasn't the easiest, or there was a difficult transition, or maybe you had an injury that occurred or a surgery that had to happen. And so colleges are looking at the story behind those grades. So standardized testing is up there, and it's kind of off to itself because you heard from Ms. Cassidy about the trend in test optional. And so that test optional piece would be something that we're going to work together as your college counselor and as a family to really determine what is going to be in the best interest of the student through this process, and how are we going to make them most competitive. So that's why it's kind of off to the side. So colleges that have it or require it, obviously that's going to be part of their admission process. Those that are test optional, we're going to make the right decision. We want to know, is that test score an accurate reflection of who you are as a student? And if that's the case, then we're going to work to submit it. If not, then we're going to look into that. But that's an individual conversation that we're going to kind of go through. Then other aspects that are going to kind of be taken into consideration are extracurricular activities. So I mentioned the different things that you might be involved in. Again, we recognize that our students are involved in a wide range of experiences, and there are many things that I think our students do that we aren't really fully aware of because you're doing them at home. Maybe you have a job or family commitments that you have that we're not as aware of, and that's where going back to that honesty and authenticity to helping us as your counselors get to know that and help you craft and figure out your story when it comes to build on that. Perhaps you're thinking about different summer experiences you might want to take advantage of, and those are things that we can certainly work together on and talk about and how you might be able to take advantage of different opportunities that might be out there. So again, those extracurricular activities are really things that those colleges are looking for because they don't want you to just come and enroll in college and just go to class, because that's not what you're doing now. They want you to be involved in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't necessarily mean to have to just be a varsity athlete or a leader in the school play, but there are all those clubs and organizations, club sports, intramural sports, so lots of different things to kind of get involved in. Community service, all of that is going to be contributing factors. And then they're really looking at what are those positive character attributes that are going to be contributed as part of the application. And this is where they're going to learn a little bit more about who you are as an individual. So when I used to read applications for admission, I remember I never wanted to look at the transcript first, because I really wanted to get to know the student, and then I would look at the transcript. And sometimes I was most pleasantly surprised and excited because we could admit that student, and then sometimes I was disappointed, but I had gotten to know that student, so when I went forward to committee, I was able to say, this is why I feel like this student would be a great fit for our institution. So those positive character attributes are going to come through in your letters of recommendation, as well as the essays and the writing that you might do. So the letters of recommendation, this is something that you will hear more about into the spring semester, but the counselor has a letter of recommendation that we write, so that's another reason that we want to just really get to know you through this process, and that's why we ask for the family feedback as well through those surveys. But the essays the teacher recommendations are also another piece that's very valuable. So typically we're going to ask you about teacher recommendations in your junior year. Again, we'll do that. There's a formal ask process that will take place in the spring. We'll go through that, but these are things just to kind of keep in mind. Who am I as a student this year? And where am I really connecting in a lot of different ways? And then finally up there we have the demonstrated interest, and we've heard a little bit about that. That can be done through those, the demonstrated interest of where you might be visiting, engaging with the colleges in a lot of different ways. I think, whether that be through the interviews, through the visits, the college representative visits when they come here in the fall, and that's why it's very important as a senior to be able to have those conversations. But also the why blank college essay. So a lot of colleges will say, well, why are you interested in our institution? So that's why those notes that Ms. Laskey was talking about, if you go on visits, taking notes is really helpful, because that can also give you a sense of, well, how am I going to write that I'm really excited about attending this institution. And those are different things that we're going to work on. We're working on all of this together. So you're not doing any of this by yourself. We're not just saying, hey, go work on this application and put together all your materials. We work throughout the summer, so that's something else that we're really going to kind of help you with. And so when Rachel said getting started early, we'd love to see your essays in the summer, because that helps us in the fall. So just to kind of go to some of those, and I'm not expecting you to remember these or have a sense right now of what those different plans are going to be in terms of your application plan, but I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, Ms. Cassidy mentioned the early decision and that trend toward the early, but so I wanted to just give you a little bit of an idea of the different terminology that we might be using. So the early decision deadlines, and if you meet or if you've talked to a college counselor prior to November 1st, pretty much between September and November 1st, you might get like a crazed look from us. It's because we're working with the students and the seniors to really get them prepared. And a lot of those early decision and early action deadlines are going to be in November. We see some of those larger state schools in October. Now they're like October 15th, those southern schools, because they start earlier, school a lot earlier in the South, so it makes it easier for them, a little more challenging for us, but we get those deadlines, we meet those deadlines. So first, early decision. This is your ultimate demonstrated interest. This is you saying, 100%, I fell in love with the college, my family agrees, my counselor's gonna sign off on it as well. It's an academic fit, it's a social fit, and it's a financial fit, and we feel like this is gonna be the best decision. So that early decision gives the college that opportunity to say, yes, if I am admitted, I will enroll. And so that's what you're saying by signing that early decision agreement. So there's also something called early decision 2. And so this is just a later opportunity for that. So if you apply early decision 1, typically those deadlines will be in November, and you'll hear by January 1st. Early decision 2, those deadlines are typically going to be early January. So you might choose to apply to one school early decision. Sadly, perhaps maybe you aren't admitted to that early decision 1 school, and then you have the opportunity to apply early decision 2 because you had a very close second choice that you wanted to demonstrate that here's my commitment to that institution. So it's the same binding agreement, it's just a later deadline. There's also early action, and so the majority of our students will have at least one early action or early decision application pending. Early action is non-binding, so typically those deadlines are going to be similar timeline, early November, possibly mid-November 15th. Today is another day. I was sitting with some students earlier to submit their applications. But so those early action deadlines allow us to just get some decisions earlier on. And like I said, the majority of our students will have at least one, if not multiple, early action deadlines. And that would be something, as we're discussing your admission plan, to think about where we want to have that balance and what schools and institutions is it going to benefit you if you want to do an early action application. And then finally, we have regular decision. And typically those deadlines are going to be toward the first of the year, the January or February deadlines. And regular decisions, release dates will typically be mid-March before April. And then you have until May 1st to indicate to colleges and universities where you're interested in attending if you weren't early decision. There are other deadlines that are going to be out there, and you've probably heard the different terminology. So you have rolling admission, which once you submit your application and it is complete, then a decision is released with, it could be anywhere from 2 weeks after that complete application or 6 weeks after that complete application. It depends on the institution. And then there's also something called restrictive early action or single choice early action. Again, I'm not expecting you to remember all of these terms, and there are definitely things that you're going to hear from us on a regular basis. But that restrictive early action, there are very few colleges that are kind of remaining out there that are holding on to that. But if you do that, then you can't have an early decision pending. Again, too detailed at this point, but definitely just key things to keep in mind as we think about our timeline and we're thinking about this whole process. The other piece that I want to reiterate, and you've heard those trends and those different things that you'll hear a lot of us in the College Counseling Office, especially when you hear from us a little bit more detail or perhaps in the question answer, you're going to hear it depends. And it really is going to be very college specific. It's also going to be very student specific. So we always want to kind of, again, think about this as an individual process and really speaking to you all in your particular process. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to another, I think, parent perspective.
Hi, my name is Maggie Zachary, and I'm the parent of 2 alumni. My oldest son, Evan, graduated in 2020, and my middle son, Tyler, graduated this past June. I also have a current 8th grader in the middle school. It wasn't too long ago that I was in your shoes, anticipating the college search process and not knowing what to expect. I'm here to assure you that you and your children are in great hands with the College Counseling Office at MBS. Our experience has been that the counselors really do get to know our children, their strengths, and what schools may be a good fit. Both of my sons felt very comfortable going to their counselor with questions and seeking advice. So my advice is to really trust the process and encourage your children to use the resources available to them, such as the workshops that are held during the summer and the ability to email and meet with their counselors whenever they or you need. I know when visiting schools and developing a college list, the tendency would sometimes be to fall in love with a school and focus all the efforts there. However, we all know that this process can be unpredictable at times, and one of the most important things we learned was to encourage our children to expand their search and develop a well-balanced list of schools using the advice from their counselor. Again, the counselors at MBS are all very experienced, have historical data, and know our children, so I would, without any hesitation, listen to their advice. I still remember the stress that this process can cause. Both of my boys did not enjoy being bombarded by college talk at unexpected times. Our children all have a lot on their minds during their busy junior and senior years, and I noticed that mine would often get irritated when I brought up something college related when they had other things on their mind, like an upcoming paper or exam. One thing that we found helpful as a family was setting up a weekly meeting. We chose to have ours on Sunday afternoons, and that is the time when we would chat about all things college, such as brainstorming essay topics and discussing upcoming deadlines. This standing meeting helped us avoid having college talk dominate our every conversation, and I think it was really key in managing the stress that could arise during this process. I hope you found the information and advice you received tonight helpful, and I wish you and your children all the best.
Hi everyone, my name is Joanne Goldberg. I'm in my 14th year here at MBS, where I've served on the faculty in the history department as a grade dean and in my current role as one of the college counselors in our college counseling department. Prior to coming to MBS, I was on faculty at MKA and at Livingston High School, and prior to that, I was a labor and employment lawyer at a New Jersey law firm. I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you. Tonight's program kicks off our individual collaboration or partnership with you. As you've heard, we will work closely with you during every step, from developing a prospective list of schools, to reviewing and providing feedback on essays, to pressing send on applications, and eventually to working through decisions. We will advocate for you through our letters of recommendation and communication with the colleges. We will keep you on track, listen to you when you're feeling anxious, and reassure you that things will, in fact, work out, and they will. We recognize that this can feel overwhelming. Parents and guardians, I've been in your shoes. I have 2 children who have gone through the process. What I found was that along with the stress came a lot of meaningful memories and moments of growth and self-discovery. I know that we've given you a lot of information this evening, and we may all need to take a deep breath, but the process plays out over the course of almost 18 months. While it's good to start by looking at an overview of the whole experience, which my colleagues, I think, did a great job of already this evening, we recommend that you take it one step at a time. So, the Junior Spring Checklist, which can be found in the folders that we distributed this evening, is a really good place to start. A side note about these folders before we get into the checklist: all the documents contained within them can also be accessed electronically through your portal on the college counseling page on the school website. So if you misplace something, don't worry about it. It can be easily replaced. Now, looking at the checklist, you'll notice that the first thing on there is to attend junior college night. So in about 20 minutes, you can check that box. For the students here tonight, as was mentioned earlier, now would be a good time for you to start thinking about what you're looking for from your college experience. The more that you discover about what you want, the better equipped we'll be to build a list of schools that's tailored to your goals and priorities. The next important task on the checklist is to complete the college counseling student and parent guardian surveys, which are not actually surveys. They're really just sets of questions designed to help you start thinking about what you're looking for and to help us get to know you a little better. There's an instruction sheet in your folder explaining how to access those through CALFO, and they should be available to you tomorrow. Students, as you work on your responses, we hope that you'll take some time to reflect on your high school experience. Think about your best memories in and out of the classroom. What made them special? Share some examples with us. Can you think of a story or experience that's just so typically you? These are the things that will help us to get to know you better and offer you our best advice. Parents and guardians, let us know your thoughts on the college process and share a few of your favorite stories. Those moments that have become family legend, or that simply capture something special about your student. Your perspectives are so helpful. They often reveal certain sides of the kids that can't be so easily seen here at school. The information that we collect will help frame our initial conversations with you. So we ask that you take the time to really think about your responses and fill out these surveys as thoroughly as you can. The upcoming Thanksgiving and winter breaks are a perfect time to start working on them. Once they're submitted, we will reach out to you starting in January to schedule our first appointment. We like to start by meeting one-on-one with the students and then inviting parents and guardians to join us for our second conversation. We'll discuss standardized testing, teacher recommendations, senior year coursework, potential summer plans, and we'll help you identify an initial list of schools that might be a good starting place for your exploration, perhaps by visiting a few college campuses over spring break. The rest of the checklist provides some information about programs that we have planned for later this spring, student and parent guardian meetings in April and May, and a college application workshop in June. Finally, here's a sampling of some do's and don'ts. Let's start with the do's. As was already mentioned, your academic record will be one of the most important components of your application. You'll want it to reflect your best efforts. Keep in mind that while your whole academic record will be reviewed, your junior and senior years will receive the most attention. One of the things that we'll discuss in our spring meetings will be your senior year schedule. In the meantime, if you're considering making changes to your schedule for this spring, we'd be happy to speak with you about that as well. Where summer is concerned, we want you to take the time to relax and recharge, but also to be productive. There are a lot of options, from summer jobs or courses to camp experiences or community service projects. If it's meaningful to you, it will enhance your applications. Be guided by your personal interests rather than what you think might look good. As Ms. Johnson mentioned, authenticity is key. Moving on to college costs. Any way you cut it, college is expensive. There are a lot of resources available to help defray costs, but not all schools take the same approach to financial aid. Some of you may have attended our financial aid workshop a couple of weeks ago. If you missed it, we will be holding another one next fall. Even for those of you who attended, you may want to come back next fall for a refresher. As was mentioned earlier, at this point, we recommend that you have a conversation as a family about what role finances will play for you. It will also be helpful for us to know so that we can offer our best advice when building a list of schools for you. Next on the list, social media. You have all heard this before. A quick Google search will reveal a number of high-profile cases in which student acceptances were rescinded as a result of social media content. One social media expert boiled his advice down to 3 rules. Number 1, you're never anonymous. Number 2, it never disappears. And number 3, anyone can find your posts. Please keep these in mind. Now let's turn to the don'ts. The first 3 are all important as we work with you to develop an appropriate and balanced list of schools. It's normal to prioritize your list and even to have favorites, but as you've heard from some of our recent alumni, there's more than one pathway to happiness and success. Some of them ended up in places that they never expected and are so happy there. As Ms. Laskey mentioned, there are well over 3,000 colleges and universities in the U.S. Keep an open mind and be willing to explore places that weren't already on your radar. In the end, it's important to feel good about your list in its entirety. The last don't. We're about to break for Thanksgiving. Keep in mind that every well-intentioned aunt, neighbor, family friend will have an opinion. In many cases, those opinions were formed based on their own experiences many years ago and will have no bearing on the current college admission landscape. In any event, remember that this is your process. Do your best to block out some of the noise that unfortunately surrounds it, and try not to let it dominate the dinner conversation. Back to the do's. Do try to enjoy this time. This is an exciting experience, and while there's a lot to do, please know that we are here to help. Before we take a few questions, we're going to hear from one last MBS alum about her college process.
Hi, my name is Liv Min, and I go to the University of Richmond. I graduated from Morristown Beard School last year, and some advice that I would give the junior class is to be more open-minded than I was about your college search. As my family and Miss Cassidy could probably attest, I was very picky about what schools I liked and what schools I could see myself at, But at the end of the day, I learned that everyone finds their place at any kind of school, no matter if you feel that you're someone who fits in a bigger environment or a smaller environment or the Northeast or out in California or whatever. I realized that people really adapt and people really fit in anywhere they go. I have friends from big school to small school, like I said, coast to coast, and everyone has really found their people and they found their kind of niche within their campus community. And I felt that's true with my friends from Morristown Beard and my friends here at the University of Richmond. I feel that if you are more open-minded than I was about your college process, that it will be less stressful, less emotional, and you will end up where you need to end up. And I know if I were a junior hearing that, I'd probably roll my eyes and say, yeah, right, but I promise you that's the truth. So really do your research on every school that's recommended to you, any school you've heard of, and I'm sure you'll find the place that you're supposed to be at and make it your own.
Okay, so as several of us have already mentioned, we know that this has been a lot of information. But if there are any questions that you have at this point, we can take a few now. And knowing that we'll be having lots of individual conversations with all of you. Questions?
Yeah.
So either we were really thorough or you're just a little stunned.
Yeah. Or both.
Yeah. Okay.
The standardized testing, whether we put that in the public domain and college see if you do take the test, is that it's still up to us whether that's blinded or not?
Whether we choose
to share it or not, or
yes.
if it's taken, it has to be shared?
No, it does not have to be shared. Yeah, so if a school is test optional, then it's up to the student whether or not they want to provide those scores. And there are some guidelines for that, and in fact, students might have a list of schools where they're providing testing to some schools and not others. We look at, kind of the mid 50% of that school's profile. And then there's also conversation about, where that testing aligns with the rest of your profile. Is it commensurate with your academic record? Some students, as I mentioned earlier, have more options in terms of the schools that they might consider without the testing because of what their transcript and the rest of their profile looks like. So those are, part of those individual conversations that each student will have with their counselor. Yes.
Oh, the college is visiting MBS?
Yeah. So, the question was about colleges visiting MBS. So that typically happens in the fall, and we've actually just completed those visits for this fall. The visits are really geared towards the seniors. It's an opportunity for them to get some last-minute questions answered, to have a face-to-face conversation with the person who's most likely reading their application. The juniors were notified at the beginning of the year that they could attend some of those visits if they had a free period, but the value of them will really come for all of you next fall once you've narrowed down your list or you're making some final decisions about where you're looking to apply. And just in terms of what that looks like, I think this year we had somewhere between 70 to 80 schools that came to visit, anywhere from, actually I think they started the first Monday of the full week that we were in school in September, and then they just finished last week. So, there are times when we'll have 2, 3, 4 colleges here on a given day.
And that list, they typically schedule over the summer prior to the start of the school year. So we have our list, and there are certain ones, so it could vary from year to year a little bit with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more, please, about the Common App and essay that goes with that. There's short questions, long questions, all
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so all students will be completing something called the Common Application, typically at early to late summer next year, and that is going to be accepted. I think at this point it's over 1,000 colleges and universities, so it is nice. They just fill it out once and they can send it to all the schools on their list. Generally, most colleges will require one personal statement, one main general essay that you'll send to all of your schools. That's really where you'll tell your story, share something, interesting about you to provide to the colleges. And then many colleges do also ask extra questions. I believe Mrs. Johnson spoke about this, some of those supplemental questions that may be more college specific. Why are you applying to our school? What are you going to bring to our campus? Things like that. So that is also going to be unfortunately pretty college specific, but it's not uncommon for students to plan for, in addition to your general essay that you'll just write once and send to all your schools. It could be anywhere from 0 to 5, 6, 7 essays per school. It's rarely the 7, the 5, 6, 7. It's usually maybe 1 or 2 that you may end up doing a good amount of writing in your process. So if you know that writing is not your favorite thing to do, just again echoing what was said earlier about starting early on that process. So.
We will also host, and these are things that you'll hear more about, but we'll host Common Application and essay writing workshops at the beginning of the summer. So right at the end of the school year, and right at the beginning of the summer, we'll have 3 different workshops. They're not mandatory, but they're a great way for us to really begin to develop, particularly that personal statement. It's a 650-word essay, and we're really looking to kind of figure out what else can we present about you, and that's something that we're going to work closely on through that process. But we have that those workshops available to assist with that too.
How
binding is it?
Oh. It's pretty common, although, and it's very binding. So as I mentioned, in last year's class, the class of 2023, ultimately 46% of the class enrolled someplace at which they had been admitted through early decision. At the same time, not all schools offer early decision, and it tends to be certain types of schools that offer early decision. So, for instance, the large state institutions are not going to offer early decision. As far as the binding piece of it, there is an actual contract. It's not a legal contract, but there is a contract that is signed by the student, by the parent or guardian, and by the counselor. So essentially, we are all agreeing that it's understood that if the student is admitted, the other applications will be withdrawn, and a deposit will go in at that school. It's really a matter of just maintaining the integrity of the process. So, we're going to have a lot of conversations around the option of early decision, if that's something a student is considering, because it is a big decision. I mean, you're forfeiting your other options, and yet one of the reasons that we bring it up is because there is an obvious benefit at many schools to be leveraged. So we don't want anybody having buyer's remorse, which is why it is an important decision, but it is such a big part of the landscape right now that it's why we want to make sure that you're educated about it.
And some institutions will share amongst themselves, and so we'll get notification of a student that may have applied early decision that has remained open in a pool, and their application is canceled. So essentially, it could have ultimately, impact that decision as well. So, again, we're all going to be in agreement on that, and we want to make sure, because it's also the reputation of the school, the institution, and making sure that the student is going to have the right option available to them.
Maybe one or two more questions? Oh, yeah. Okay, so the question is, when is the best time to take your SAT? As Ms. Laskey said, one of our common answers is it depends, and that's one of those it depends kinds of answers. Typically students will start the standardized testing at some point in the spring. So the first ACT after the first of the year is in February. The first SAT is in March. And then there are multiple others, throughout the spring semester. In recent years, they've even added some summer dates. And if students still want to, take either test again, they can always do so in early fall in time for any application deadlines. So it really depends on, students' individual schedules. I mean, sometimes that works around, a sports season or other things that you have going on. It may depend on whether you're doing some, formalized prep work in preparation for that first test. But as a general recommendation, you'd want to have at least one test done in the spring, if not two. And then sometimes students are done at that point, or like I said, they might continue in the summer or early fall. Generally, we don't recommend testing more than 2 to 3 times. Scores don't tend to change very much beyond a certain point. And again, those are individual conversations that we will have with each family. Okay, well, like I said, we've provided you with a lot of information, and I hope that if one thing resonates with you, it's that there is a lot of support in this process. We will be working very individually with all of you. We look forward to that, and we'll also be available, out in the lobby if you have any lingering questions or anything that you'd just like to touch base on, or at least say hello before you leave tonight. But again, we do thank you for your attention, and have a wonderful break and a very happy Thanksgiving.